Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are continuing a recent series that I've been doing on this YouTube channel where I go in depth into what I think each team with a large amount of cap space should do with said cap space in this year's upcoming free agency. Today we are talking about the Miami Heat and their $20 million ish amount of cap space that they have to spend. However, before we talk about the Heat, I just want to leave a reminder for you to like and subscribe. I've been appreciating all the support I've been receiving lately, and I hope to see that continue. So let's keep working to grow the channel. It helps you out because you get more basketball content, and it helps me out because I enjoy the sport. So thanks, and without further ado, let's get into what the Miami Heat should do with their 2020 free agency. Before we talk about actual free agents, though, I want to just do a quick rollover of the current pieces that this team has in place. At the point guard position, they have a couple of young guys in Kendrick Nunn and Tyler Hero. I know that the fact that I consider Hero to be a point guard might be a little on the different end of what most people think. I'm sure many view him as more of a wing type player. However, they utilized him at the point guard a lot of the time in the playoffs with this past NBA Finals run that they had, where they lost to the Lakers, of course. But I also think that that's a position that he is capable of playing, especially if he can improve as a pick and roll ball handler and work on his chemistry with Bam Adebayo. That could become a lethal combination in the two-man game for years to come. So if he can make that improvement, I really think that playing the one is a good spot for Tyler Hero, especially with his ability to shoot the ball off the bounce, make good passes, and be a plus rebounder for his size. If you're playing him at the one, it could give you a huge advantage, and I'm a believer in Tyler Hero overall, and I think that he has the potential to be a very, very good NBA player. The other young point guard they have is Kendrick Nunn, who has a non-guaranteed contract next season, but the Heat would be nuts not to pick that up because he had a pretty solid year for them, making first team All-Rookie, and it's a really cheap deal, not even $2 million. It's pretty much the rookie minimum. With Nunn, he is a player who can get to the rim well, is decent playmaking, plays okay defense, and is an all-right shooter, but really needs to make improvements in all areas of his game in order to really establish himself as a reliable contributor in a playoff setting. We did see him have a great regular season, but after he got coronavirus, we saw him lose a lot of his playing time in the bubble to guys like Goran Dragic and Tyler Hero due to both a lack of productivity as well as probably something that had to do with all the time he missed with COVID-19. However, with the cheap deal he has, I would not be surprised to see the Heat bring him back, and I think that it's definitely the right deal. Of course, I wouldn't be surprised. It's a no-brainer. At the wing position, this is where the Heat really have loaded up in recent seasons, acquiring Andre Iguodala and Jay Crowder in trade, signing Duncan Robinson off of waivers to be on their G League team and eventually promoting him to the pro big league club, and finally signing Jimmy Butler to the max contract last offseason in the signing trade. So this is a spot where they've got a lot of weapons. With Robinson, he's a guy that has excellent shot mobility and is one of the better shooters on the planet. He can shoot the ball off the bounce, off of movement, and of course off a catch and shoot. So that makes him a very dangerous offensive option in the way that he spaces the floor for weapons like Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo makes him very important to what the Heat like to do. Butler is really the milk that makes the body go. I totally screwed up that saying. What is it? The drink? Or no, it's the straw that stirs the drink. That's the saying. The milk? I don't know where I got that, but Jimmy Butler is the superstar for the Heat. He's outstanding at getting to the rim, getting to the foul line. He takes one of the highest amount of free throws per minute as anyone in the league, up there with other superstars like Giannis Antetokounmpo, Kawhi Leonard, LeBron James, James Harden. He is right in that tier in terms of getting to the line, and he converts those at a pretty considerably high rate. That's really the most important aspect of his game, his ability to impact the pace and tempo of the game by getting to the free throw line. We saw him kill the Lakers with it, and on top of that, he's one of the better two-way wing defenders in the league. So Jimmy Butler is the star for this team and the guy that they are really building around as they try to make a championship run next season. Andre Iguodala is a reliable guy who can come off the bench and give you some solid minutes. Obviously, he would be a much better player if he could shoot the ball, but he does bring some excellent energy and ability on defense. He's a good leader, and although his $15 million option for next year might be a bit of an overpay, he is going to be a solid rotational guy for you in the playoffs unless we see him take another drop off of his current production. The last guy I want to talk about is KZ Okpala. You could consider him a big guy, but from what I've seen, he probably would function better on the wing. His shooting needs to improve, but overall, he has shown some athleticism stuff that makes him a bit of an intriguing prospect. Really, I haven't seen very much of this guy, so I'm far from an expert, and I am not going to say much more because I really don't know much about him. Bam Adebayo is the second best player on this Heat team and likely the guy that they are really focused on moving forward. He is up for a rookie extension in this upcoming offseason, and I'm not sure that he'll get it because the Heat do want to keep their cap space for the 2021 offseason intact. However, he's going to get a max and perhaps even the Rose Rule max that gives him an extra incentive-based pay upgrade. He would have to make an All-NBA team next season or win Defensive Player of the Year in order to get that Rose Rule incentive, but I do think that that's certainly possible for him, especially since he plays at the weaker center position. Bam took a big step forward this season as a ball handler and playmaker at the big man position. He showed that he's very capable of being entrusted to have the ball in his hands, and especially in the Celtics series, we saw him have a very, very good playoff run. You know what you're going to get out of Bam. Excellent defense, pretty solid playmaking. If his shooting can improve, though, that's where he can elevate into a top 10 player in the league. He's good at creating shots for his teammates, he's good on the defensive end, and he's a good rebounder. Now he just has to improve in creating shots for himself, and that's how he can take another step forward and really become a top 10 guy. The other big guys on this team are Kelly Olynyk and Chris Silva. Olynyk is a guy who can space the floor for you, gives good effort on defense, but is clearly not a super gifted athlete, which doesn't allow him to be any sort of plus defender. And on the offensive end, he actually impressed me a little bit with his playmaking ability, and he also can create a little bit of a shot for himself, but he overall is really just a solid backup center option for you as a guy who can space the floor exceptionally well. Silva is a young guy who, similar with Okpala, I haven't seen much, but I've seen more of Silva than I have of Okpala, so I feel like I can talk about him a bit more. He had a really, really solid season for the Heat this past year as a backup big man. I believe that he's going to end up being a really solid rotational piece, especially since he's on the Heat and they seem to develop every single player on their roster into being a rotational piece. But with Silva, I think that he can be a solid rim protector, even though he's only 6'8" and a bit undersized for that. He just has to work on his foul tendency, as he had a really bad fouling habit this past season. I think he averaged about 8.8 fouls per 36 minutes. That's not something you need. So if he can improve on that, become more conservative with his decision-making on the defensive end of the floor, I think that could allow him to be a solid NBA big man. He really can't shoot at all to space the floor, and that could make him a poor fit with Adebayo. However, once again, I'm not expecting him to be a starter or anything. I just think he could be a guy that gives them solid bench minutes, probably only during the regular season, as he probably wouldn't be a part of a playoff rotation as early as next season. In terms of outgoing free agents, that's where this Heat team gets really interesting. Goran Dragic, Jay Crowder, Derek Jones Jr., Myers Leonard, Solomon Hill, and Udonis Haslem are all on expiring deals. I think the safest bet to be coming back to this team next season out of all those guys is clearly Udonis Haslem. This guy is going to be on the Miami Heat until he has grandchildren. So I think he'll probably be sticking around on a minimum deal. That's probably one of the safer bets in the NBA for this upcoming offseason. Dragic and Crowder are two really important guys that I think they need to really think about keeping around, but I'll talk about that a bit later, more in depth. Myers Leonard and Solomon Hill were solid rotational guys that they could look to bring around on very cheap minimum type deals. And Derrick Jones is one of the younger guys on this roster, and he's a good athletic defender who can finish in transition well. However, I think he's likely to receive an offer sheet from a rebuilding team that will lead him to leave the Heat in this upcoming offseason. In terms of draft picks, I think that at the 20th pick, the Heat could either add a solid rotational piece like Tyrell Terry, Malachi Flynn, Desmond Bane, Isaiah Stewart, or Josh Green, or a guy that's a bit more of a project that they could work into becoming a player that could be a part of the Heat monster in the future. Someone that would fit more of the project billing would be like a Cole Anthony, Alexei Pokusevsky, or Jaden McDaniels. In the end, I think they'll probably go with a guy like Terry or Bane as someone that can exist as probably a regular season rotational piece, and potentially, if they progress the way we've seen guys like Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson do in the past for the Heat, a guy that could play some playoff minutes for them. So, after talking about all of the ways that they can add to the roster in the draft and the outgoing free agents that they have, as well as the current pieces they have, we will finally get into what the Heat can do in free agency this offseason. It all starts with Goran Dragic and Jay Crowder, in my opinion. These guys were super important starter level guys on this roster this past season. Dragic was their leading scorer all the way through the Eastern Conference playoffs up until he got injured in Game 1 of the NBA Finals when he hurt his plantar fascia. That was just a very tragic injury for Dragic, and you'll hope to see him bounce back. However, there are injury and age questions which would lead me to be concerned about giving him a multi-year offer if I were the Heat. However, an overpay in the $14 to $16 million range for one season with maybe a team option for the second year would make some sense to me if I were the Heat. Dragic's playmaking and shot creation is really important to this team, and although he's not the best defender at the point of attack, he's still very valuable to them. Crowder is a guy that shot the ball really well in the playoffs from deep and shot the ball really poorly in the regular season from deep. He brings good defense and good energy on that end of the floor, but I have enough questions about the shot that I would be very nervous about overpaying him in this upcoming offseason based off of just some good playoff performances. Depending on how much they give those two guys, they could have the full mid-level available to them this upcoming offseason. The first guy I would think about there would be Jay Crowder, but like I said, I have enough questions about the shooting that there are other options on the market that I have more interest in. If it came down to giving the mid-level to Jay Crowder or Justin Holiday, I would be more inclined to give it to Holiday. I don't think that's the most likely scenario since Crowder was on the roster last year and there's probably some mutual interest in bringing him back. But I think that the fact that Holiday is probably a more reliable shooter would make him a more intriguing option to me if I were the Heat to use their mid-level exception on. Another guy would be Paul Millsap, and I know he's getting up there in age, and he might be a guy you would expect to get a balloon payment where he gets a one-year deal that probably overpays him for his current value. But I think that if the Heat gave him the full mid-level exception for multiple years, bringing him in to be their starting power forward in the playoffs and maybe a bench type guy in the regular season, depending on if they still want to start Bam at the 4 in the regular season, although I don't really think they should. I would rather see them move Bam to the 5 and start Millsap in this particular scenario, but Millsap could play the Jay Crowder role and play it a bit better, as I think he has a bit more to his offensive game off the bounce, and I think he can do very similar things on the defensive end of the floor while also being a more reliable three-point shooter. These are two guys on kind of opposite ends of the spectrum because I think Millsap could get underpaid based off of his playoff struggles, and Crowder could get overpaid based off of his playoff production. So in that case, obviously you want to underpay a guy rather than overpay a guy. So I think that if Millsap was gettable on the mid-level on a 2 to 3 year deal, I would certainly consider that if I were the Heat. On the other hand, if they pay Dragic and Crowder a certain amount of money, I looked, but I couldn't quite find what that particular amount was. They will not have the full mid-level at their fingertips. Instead, they will only be able to use the mini mid-level, which is about $4.5 million. A couple candidates here would be a guy like Wesley Matthews, who could be a nice contributor for them as a wing defender who can also space the floor, play a bit of a similar role to what Crowder did, albeit at a different position since Matthews is a bit smaller. He's a capable defender, and obviously you'd be stealing him away from a fellow contender, so I think that could be a solid idea for them, just as another guy to add to their wing rotation. Jordan McLaughlin and DJ Augustine are some very interesting backup point guard ideas for me. Like I said, if Dragic leaves, they could be in need of a backup point guard, and Augustine and McLaughlin are two very, very interesting ideas there as guys that aren't necessarily going to increase your ceiling as a playoff contender, but could just be a solid contributor off the bench as guys that can be solid playmakers, ball handlers, and floor generals really overall off the bench. McLaughlin is one of the more interesting free agents to me this offseason, and I will be very interested to see what kind of offers he gets and whether or not the Timberwolves will be willing to match those particular offers, because I think that he was a very serviceable backup point guard this past season for Minnesota. The last mid-level guy I have here is Shaquille Harrison, who had some very good minutes for the Bulls this past year. I think that the Heat would be a perfect spot for him to land because he could improve their defensive potential at the point of attack while also being able to play off the ball a little bit, since they have other guys that aren't necessarily point guards that can handle the ball, like Tyler Hero, Jimmy Butler, and Bam Adebayo. If Harrison can get his shot down and take it from the 29% range that it has been for his whole career up to like the 38% range that it was last season, he could be a very, very good piece for a team, and he's still considerably young. And so for those reasons, I think Shaq Harrison could be a really nice option for the Heat to grab with their taxpayer mid-level exception. The last group of guys I want to talk about here are guys that the Heat could sign for a minimum that could be potential playoff contributors. I think the first couple of guys that you have to talk about here are Myers Leonard and Solomon Hill. Since they were on the roster last season, both of them could come back and have a role with this team. Leonard as a backup big man who can space the floor and be an okay rim protector, and Hill as a wing defender who really doesn't have much of a function on offense, but does play solid defense and can maybe space the floor for you a bit better than some of the alternatives could. Other guys that aren't on this roster that I think they could bring in and be solid contributors on the minimum are Jeff Teague, who could be an okay backup point guard, really a third option, a fifth guard type behind guys like Hero, Robinson, Nunn, and Dragic. Courtney Lee could be another fifth guard type, although he plays the 2 instead of the 1 like Teague. Lee can still shoot the ball well and is a pretty good defensive player. He is getting up there in age, but he's always been in really good shape, and so for those reasons, I think that he can continue to be a contributor, and I would look to bring him in on the minimum if I were the Heat. CJ Miles is a similar option to Lee that has some defensive versatility and can really shoot it. Anthony Tolliver can shoot the ball well and plays okay defense. He doesn't do much in terms of rebounding or creating his own shot, but it's a minimum. You're not going to get much better than just a guy who can give you some minutes. Finally, if they are looking to bring in a third big man to back up Adebayo and Olynyk, John Henson could be a solid idea. I really like him as a big man who can be a good rim protector and rim runner. So those are some guys I would certainly consider on minimum contracts if I were the Heat. So in summary, I think that the first priority should be re-signing Goran Dragic. After that, look to bring in some help on the wings, whether it's Jay Crowder from internal, bringing back Jay Crowder as an internal free agent, or bringing in a guy from the outside like Justin Holiday or Paul Millsap. And after that, really just fill out the roster with some serviceable rotational pieces. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like and subscribe. Leave a comment in the comment section down below on what you think the Heat should do in this upcoming 2020 free agency period. That's it for me, ladies and gentlemen. I will see you all again very soon.